Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show on this edition for March 29th, 2021. And as usual, if you would like additional information, you may call 800-472-0391. Or better yet, get online at weather.com/Alaska. Well, we certainly have had our share of warnings and advisories impact the state here over the past 24 hours or so. And initially it's been the West Coast that's had to deal with snow and blowing snow and blizzard conditions, and that's extended inland up through the heart of the Yukon Valley. To start though, we do have one advisory down there in the southeast. It has to do with White Pass, which there will be a winter weather advisory in effect from 6 a.m. Tuesday through 6 a.m. Wednesday for some snow. Otherwise, areas across the west side of the state continue to be under blizzard warnings along the coast. Inland areas, winter storm warnings through 6 a.m. During the day on Tuesday. And as a result, we'll see conditions start to improve during the day on Tuesday there in the west. However, winter storm warnings remain in effect for central areas, and we are expecting that especially up through the central and eastern Yukon Valley, all the way from say Galena up to Fort Yukon and Arctic Village, these winter storm warnings will remain in effect until 6 p.m. on Tuesday for snow and blowing snow. And then finally, along the Arctic coast, there are winter weather advisories in effect for primarily blowing snow, and that'll be in effect until midnight Tuesday night as an area of low pressure continue to sit over the Seward Peninsula and impact a large chunk of the west and central areas of the state. So on the satellite imagery, you know the brighter enhanced clouds out over the northern Gulf of Alaska, and you'll kind of see a hump to them. That hump is a ridge of high pressure in the upper atmosphere. And we have riding along this some very strong winds aloft. The jet stream winds at around 30,000 feet are zipping along at anywhere from around 120 to 130 knots. And we are anticipating that an area of low pressure will be developing along a trough and frontal boundary that currently resides through the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island as we head into the day tomorrow. Right now, though, it's just a fairly weak surface reflection. But what we are going to watch is low pressure developing over the northern Gulf of Alaska during the day, Tuesday into Tuesday night. That's going to cause precipitation to increase a bit over portions of the southeast coast and then developing westward from Yakutat on over to Prince William Sound. Now, in the northwest, up there near Nome is where we have the area of low pressure that's been sitting up there circulating, the one that has brought the windy and snowy conditions to the west coast and the blizzard conditions. Now that moisture has spread inland up through the middle and will be reaching the upper Yukon Valley, producing some snow and blowing snow. And then on the north side of the boundary, we're getting more of an easterly winds there along the Arctic coast, so they're going to see blowing snow there, and this will continue into the day on Tuesday. And then finally, as we get more looking off toward the southwest, you can see the circulation of the clouds, kind of more of a southwesterly flow extending back, yet there's another frontal system way out approaching the western Aleutians. But the main weather players coming up here for tonight in through the day tomorrow and tomorrow night will be the low that will work its way eastward from the Seward Peninsula into the kind of the north central interior, and then the low that'll develop over the northern Gulf of Alaska. And one more run of the satellite imagery shows again the ridging out over the Gulf of Alaska and the swirl there of the low pressure that's located over the Seward Peninsula. So there's that low. That's the main weather feature, and you can see the blowing snow by the crossed arrows there along the Arctic coast, extending down portions of the west coast. We have kind of a stalled out frontal boundary across north central Alaska into the Yukon. South of that boundary, temperatures have actually been up around or a bit above freezing, especially along and south of the central Yukon Valley. But areas to the west, there is some colder air, especially once the system does move inland and work its way eastward. Along the southeast coast, some troughiness lags. We do have a little stronger high at 1042 there, south of the Gulf out over the Pacific. And then you can see that trough that extends from the Kenai Peninsula across the Kodiak Island out into the Pacific. That is where a wave will develop and low pressure then will take shape as we head through the day on Tuesday into Tuesday night over the northern Gulf. So as we go through tonight, look for that low pressure kind of sitting there over the Seward Peninsula, but it will begin to make some progress slowly eastward. As I said, blizzard conditions will still continue overnight into the very early pre-dawn hours along the west coast as snow and some blowing snow spreads inland, especially up through the interior, up through the heart of the Yukon and eastern Yukon Valley. And then that trough down there south of the Alaska Peninsula, the wave will be developing up around Kodiak Island and the Kenai. And by Tuesday afternoon, you'll see that low pressure system developing there over the northern Gulf, flinging rain along the immediate coastline, some mixed precipitation in the southeast coastal mountains with snow in the more interior mountains. And for the rest of the state on Tuesday, especially the interior, many areas of primarily light snow as that low pressure begins to start to lose its grip. And then another frontal system way out there, the western Barren and western Aleutians, will begin to work its way eastward. As we get into Wednesday, the low continues to sit there over the northern Gulf of Alaska with some of that energy moving inland up across the southeast into the Yukon. And that system will continue to produce snow mainly in the interior of the southeast with mixed precipitation along the coast and then rain out over the Gulf. Areas in the north, that low pressure will continue to slowly weaken with areas of patchy light snow around it. And still the potential there for blowing snow, not just along the Arctic coast, but also portions of the northwest coast extending down to Kotzebue Sound and areas just west of Nome. So temperatures, we are looking for low temperatures in the mid and upper 30s across the southeast from Skagway to Ketchikan. Copper River Valley will be down the upper teens around 20, about 29, a bit below freezing in Anchorage, and near freezing, especially Kodiak Island and the southwest peninsula. In the north, 10 below along the Arctic coast, but readings holding up into the mid-20s up there toward the middle Yukon Valley. And extending out across the southwest, lows generally in the 20s, though around or slightly above the freezing mark either side there of the Bering or Pacific, extending out into the Aleutians. And on Tuesday afternoon, highs will be back up in the lower 40s across the southeast. And Anchorage area should be up to about 36, whereas you're looking at highs in the mid 30s to upper 30s there down through Kodiak Island and extending out through the southwest peninsula. In the far north, the Arctic coast will stay a few degrees below zero, whereas portions along and south of the Yukon River could see some high temperatures get a couple degrees above freezing, and then extending out through the southwest panhandle there, high temperatures will generally be a few degrees above freezing in the mid 30s to even up near 40 in the outward islands as we get out there through the Aleutians. Low temperatures Wednesday morning, generally in the mid 30s across the southeast, down into the teens, the interior south central areas, and down around 20 or so in the Anchorage area, but colder than that west of there. As we go to the north, lows will be around 10 below or so along the Arctic coast and in the teens and single digits through the Yukon Valley. And then extending out across the southwest peninsula, look for lows a little below zero there in the interior west of McGrath. And then as we go out toward the water, either side, lows generally in the 20s, extending off the tip there, and in the low to mid 30s in the Aleutians. Finally, high temperatures on Wednesday afternoon should reach the lower 40s, Skagway and Haines down through Ketchikan, and then back toward Prince William Sound near 40. Anchorage should get up to about 34, 35. Temperatures west, though, of the mountains only in the teens there out through the southwest. And in the north, continue to see temperatures run a few degrees below zero for high temperatures there along the Arctic coast, with highs generally in the 20s south of the Yukon River. And then as we go through the southwest, look for temperatures in the interior to only be in the teens and 20s, but extending off the peninsula, highs in the 30s at a near 40.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
I'm meteorologist Peter Chan with the National Weather Service in Anchorage, and here is the aviation weather segment of our program for today. Well, looking ahead into Tuesday for the flying weather, we have low pressure that's moved inland across the western portion of the state, spreading IFR conditions all the way from the west into the Yukon Valley. Now, this system had been producing blizzard conditions along the west coast. Those will gradually abate toward early Tuesday morning, with winter storm conditions continuing across portions of the Yukon Valley. And we're watching also another area of low pressure that will be taking shape later on Tuesday, especially across the northern Gulf of Alaska. So that will also induce IFR conditions along the southeast coast that will eventually build back across south central areas. And we can see that as we start to go into Tuesday afternoon and especially Tuesday night. Still areas, though, of IFR continuing there in portions of the west and northwest, also across south central areas of the Brooks Range down to the western Alaska Range, and then a pocket of IFR way out in the western Aleutians. By Wednesday morning, we see that area of IFR expanding into Prince William Sound, extending along the southeast coast, pocket remaining up to the north and east central areas and back across the Brooks Range into the northwest coast. Also some IFR conditions working their way inland there across the eastern Aleutians into the Alaska Peninsula and a broad area out over the western Aleutians and central Bering Sea. So that by Wednesday afternoon, conditions across the mainland will become mainly MVFR, though still some IFR possible there in the northwest and lingering in portions of the southeast, with a broader area of IFR conditions moving from the central Bering and eastern Aleutians into the beginning of the Alaska Peninsula. So past conditions on Tuesday, Anaktuvuk will be MVFR, and that is the case for Adigan as well. We anticipate MVFR conditions. As you head further back toward the southwest, both Lake Clark and Merrill will tend to be MVFR across the east entrances. However, the western entrances will likely remain in IFR conditions on Tuesday. And then as we head on over toward Rainy Pass a little more northward, MVFR conditions will become IFR during the afternoon. And generally, Windy Pass should remain MVFR throughout the day on Tuesday, as we do expect Isabel to stay the same. And then Metasta will hold on to VFR conditions during the day on Tuesday. Further south and west, Tanita will generally be MVFR. And then finally down around Portage, we expect MVFR conditions, but more in the way of IFR conditions developing on the east end, especially out over Prince William Sound, as that area of low pressure gets better organized across the northern Gulf of Alaska. And then finally, in the southeast, Chilkoot and White will be IFR, slowly improving to MVFR by afternoon. And a check of the freezing levels. We'll see the freezing level down near the surface, the inner coastal mountains, and then along the south central coast back over the Alaska Peninsula into the Bering Sea. Some elevated freezing levels of 2,000 and 4,000 feet there along the southeast coast, as well as out toward the western Aleutians. And then taking a look at icing, the most active area of precipitation will be coming onshore there in through the southeast and building back across south central areas later on Tuesday into Tuesday night, with icing generally above 5,000 feet in the southeast, above 4,000 feet across the southwest, and above 3,000 feet there in the northwest, as well as along and north of the Aleutian chain in the Bering Sea. And then finally, as we take a look out for turbulence, the best chance of some turbulence there in the southeast will generally be below 6,000 feet along the in and out of the intercoastal mountains, and also back through the southwest, extending out into the Aleutian chain, where they'll be below 3,000 feet, as well as St. Lawrence and parts of the northwest.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service with another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining me today are not just one, but two people, both with the last name Stevens, which is even more fun, but no relation. We have Eric Stevens from Gina and George Stevens, who is a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And today you guys brought a really cool toy, or I should say tool, with you. It's a sandbox, but why are you guys working on a sandbox?
Well, it's part of our senior design project, and we were approached by EPSCoR to build this for them. They had a proof of concept that they developed about a year ago, I think, and they wanted a more robust version that they could pack onto a plane and take places, and it's a handy learning tool for kids and adults.
So you're a mechanical engineering student. You've built a traveling sandbox for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, and Gina's facilitated this. But why do we need a traveling sandbox?
Well, the prototype was such a big hit that they decided they wanted another one, actually two, that they could that would be easier to travel with, possibly marketable even.
Okay, so this is a traveling sandbox that's got a lot of bits and pieces and a computer hooked up to it. What is the computer doing with the sand?
The computer actually uses a Kinect sensor to read the topography of the sand or the shape of the sand, and then the computer translates that into information which it projects using a projector onto the sand, showing topographical lines and which is representative of the shape of the sand.
Okay, so this is a live mapping tool?
Yeah. It's interactive. As you're moving your hands through it, it is actively following and changing the lines to fit what you're doing.
That sounds like something I could have in my backyard.
Yep.
It'd be a lot of fun. So you guys had to change the design a little bit to make this more Alaska-fied, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, how'd you do that?
Well, the original was made out of basically lumber and Simpson strong tie type stuff, and we rebuilt it to make it lighter and basically more transportable. We can pack it down to a fairly small size, and it can be loaded onto a plane and flown anywhere in the state.
Which you guys did today. And you have plans to take this in other places of Alaska, right?
Yep, we're actually going to be headed down to Homer with it later today.
Okay, very good. Eric, how does this fit into science learning around Alaska?
Well, you know what? I think it is a tool and it is a toy. And it brings out a smile from an 8-year-old and the smile from a 48-year-old with that inner 8-year-old wanting to get out. The sandbox, it's an interactive learning tool that teaches us how topography in the 3 dimensions is related to, say, a 2-dimensional map. More about that later. Just like George was saying, it's got a Kinect sensor, not just for video games anymore. It can sense out the lay of the land there, feeds that information in the computer. The computer identifies that, sends a signal to a projector to send topographic lines to map over that lumpy ground. So you get a 3-dimensional topo map out of it. And my favorite thing about it, this is the thing that stops people at the trade show, they stop at your booth and don't leave, is that you run your hand through that sandbox and it responds in real time. It remaps the topography as you get to be Mr. Tectonic Plate Drifter there. You can make things how you want. Well, what if we made a really high mountain here and a low valley there, and the lines adjust to what you did? It's a learning tool because it shows you that connection between these 2-dimensional topo lines and what's really out in Alaska. And Alaska's a place with all kinds of topography. You know, we're from the Great Plains, where topo maps tend to be just like blank pieces of paper. But Alaska is particularly gifted in this regard, and this tool helps us, I think, learn more about our state, really.
Absolutely. And so this is going to enhance STEM learning, the science, technology, engineering, and math in many different locations around Alaska. Then this would be something that kids and teachers can get their hands on.
Mm-hmm. It sure is. And I mentioned the, it's like flypaper at a booth that, or at the Science Potpourri when we had Greg's original version of this sandbox, and that one was made out of scraps of wood, and it was a prototype. But even that one, before it had some of the refinements that George and crew have made for this newer, upscaled, maybe a 2.0 version of the sandbox, even that one was so attractive to people. It just demonstrated that this has potential to be a learning tool, an outreach tool, an education tool that now is portable and can go places in Alaska. Of course, there's only one sandbox, can't be everywhere at once, but hopefully it gets out there, gets the word out about EPSCoR and what science is being done here for Alaskans.
All right, that sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands in the sand and try this out for myself. We're going to demonstrate this here in our next segment of Alaska Weather Facts, but before we go, we want to remind you that EPSCoR, which is a new acronym for me now, but I'm going to remember this because you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter, and I invite you to do that. Alaska EPSCoR is also something that facilitates science learning at the University of Alaska around the state, and that stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So check that out, and make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to have the next version where we actually get our hands in the sand and check out how this works and demonstrates that topography. So for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you again next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at the sea ice analysis for today. Still a fair amount of ice in Cook Inlet, especially south of the Forelands. Otherwise, a little bit thinner in Bristol Bay than even yesterday or the day before, with looks like area of almost sea ice free zone there showing up Togiak Bay. And not much change out along the main ice edge. So moving on to coastal water forecast. Small craft advisories along the outer coastline for southwest winds at 25 knots, 12-foot seas. Inside waters, Lynn Canal looking at small craft advisories for southerly wind tomorrow at 25 knots, seas 5 feet. South 20 for Stevens Passage with gale force gusts to 35 knots. And south winds at 15 knots with 6-foot seas for Clarence Strait. Big increase in the winds on Wednesday there, with Clarence Strait seeing gale warnings as winds increase from the south to 35 knots and seas build to 12 feet. Gale warnings on the south coast for west-southwesterlies sustained 35 knots, 16-foot seas. Small craft advisories on the north coast for southwest winds 25 to 30 knots with 11 to 13-foot seas. Lynn Canal, south winds 25 knots. Stevens Passage, south winds at 30. And for Tuesday, for Prince William Sound and the North Gulf Coast, looking at southerly winds at 10 knots with 8 to 9-foot seas, west winds at 15 for the Barren Islands. Kamishak Bay, light westerly breeze at 10 knots, seas 3 feet, and southern Cook Inlet, southwest winds 20 knots, while north of the Forelands, looking at a south breeze at 15. For Wednesday, north winds at 15 knots for northern Cook Inlet, while it goes northwest south of the Forelands. But good gales, Kamishak Bay, west 40 knots, and 40 knots also for the Barren Islands out of the northwest with 12-foot seas. North Gulf Coast, northwesterlies, 20 knots, 7-foot seas, and northwest at 15 with 3-foot seas for Prince William Sound. Shelikof Strait and Kodiak Island, west winds 15 to 20 knots, 5 to 8-foot seas. For the Alaska Peninsula, westerly winds 30 knots with 10 to 13-foot seas. Bristol Bay, southwest at 20, seas 6 feet. And for Wednesday, for the Alaska Peninsula, 40-knot northwesterlies, actually from Cape Sarachep to Sitkinak, gale warnings for 40-knot winds out of the northwest, east side of Kodiak Island, gale warnings, northwest at 35 knots, Bristol Bay, northwest 35 knots, Shelikof Strait, northwest at 30. And for the Fox Islands tomorrow, northwest winds 30 to 35 knots with 11 to 15-foot seas, and for Adak and Atka, northwest at 30 knots. Probably the strongest winds for Atka as the high-pressure ridge axis moves across Adak. You'll be seeing lighter winds, and then gales coming back into the far western Aleutians with the next system of 35 knots from the southwest. And for Wednesday, now we've got west-southwesterlies, western Aleutians, 35 knots, Adak and Atka, gale warnings, west 35 to 40 knots, and Unmak Island, west winds 35 knots. On Alaska Islands, west winds 30 to 35 knots, seas 11 to 14 feet. For the southwest coast, small craft advisories for northwest winds 25 knots and gale warnings for the Pribilof Islands, northwest at 35, St. Matthew Island, northwest 30, same thing for St. Lawrence Island. And then moving on to Wednesday, we've got light north winds for the Yukon Delta coast at 10 knots and Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, northwest at 20. Small craft advisories for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, north 25. Lighter winds for the Pribilofs, west 15, but east 20 for St. Matthew Island. And for the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast, easterlies 30 to 35 knots, and the west side northwest 30 knots, and that swings around to the northwest at 30 knots from Cape Thompson to Wales. For Wednesday, Wales to Cape Thompson, northwest 25 for brisk wind advisories. Brisk wind advisories for the remainder of the Arctic coast there. The only area with lighter winds will be from Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, north 20, otherwise 25 to 30 knot winds everywhere else. And for tonight, snow and blowing snow up that way along the Arctic coast and around the bend there into the southeast Chukchi Sea to the Bering Strait, maybe St. Lawrence Island, but not that great of extent. Otherwise, widespread snow showers, southeastern Bering Sea, Pribilofs, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. Into the interior, areas of snow and rain and snow for the Panhandle under continued southwest flow. That'll continue a wet weather pattern for the southeast coast as well as the North Gulf Coast. Rain and snow tomorrow, periods of snow areas tending to end at Kodiak Island with increasing northwest winds, and areas of snow pretty widespread with upper level trough over the interior. All the way up to the Arctic coast with some blowing snow possible, colder temperatures and snow for the Alaska Peninsula. Next system coming into the western Bering Sea disappears on Wednesday. High pressure over the northern Bering. Otherwise, we've got low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska. Still a wet weather pattern for the Panhandle. Periods of rain and snow depending on elevation, latitude, and time of day with areas of snow eastern and central interior.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.